mysterious. People of Reddit that honestly believe they have been abducted by aliens. What was your experience like? Story 1. This happened to me when I was 10 years old in Calgary, Alberta in 1970. I was walking home from school, cutting across the school sports field. Our house wasn't far. We lived across the street from the school. There weren't any other kids around since I had stayed late for volleyball practice and the rest of the students had gone home 45 minutes earlier when school let out for the day. It is about 4:30 in the afternoon. Something caught my attention from the corner of my eye and I stopped and turned to the right to look at it. Floating directly above a house facing the schoolyard was a large UFO. I was in the middle of the football field, so this is about 60 to 70 yards distance from where I stood. The UFO was big, almost touching the roof of the house. It's completely centered on the house, but it's so big, it's also above the house on the left and the right. The lots there are 50 feet wide, which puts the UFO at about 150 feet across and perhaps 25 to 30 feet tall. It's very bright, giving off a harsh white light, which is difficult to look at since it hurt my eyes. I look away back towards my house and see a car and a motorcycle on the side street which intersects the street with the UFO. That street is about half a block away, and I remember being surprised and confused that the drivers are not reacting to the UFO, which clearly must be visible to them and so obvious since it's so bright, but the traffic continues as normal. At that point, I become aware that something is forcing me to turn my head back toward the UFO. I'm turning and my field of view is changing, but I'm not the one doing it. I struggle to turn away, but I simply can't control any of my body anymore. I remember a feeling of panic. Then the next thing that I can remember, I'm walking into my house. It's about 9:30 at night and dark outside. I can't recall anything from the last 5 hours. My parents were furious with me for being so late. Apparently, my parents and my 2 brothers had been trying to find me for hours. A voice or a thought in my head tells me to tell them that I'm not feeling well and I need to go to bed. I have no idea where that voice or thought came from, but I do exactly as it suggests and run upstairs to my room and go to bed. The next day, I still can't seem to explain what happened, and my mother's even angrier with me since my new school shoes are ruined, since the tops of them are all scuffed and dirty like I was dragged face down across the ground with my feet still dragging on the ground. I told my brothers what happened and they suggested I just keep quiet about it since nobody would believe me. Good advice as it turns out, since in the many years since, most of the people I've shared the story with don't really know what to say afterward. Many years later, I'm looking at my old school workbooks from that time and they were full of drawings of UFOs, all of the same design and with more detail than I can recall from memory. For example, in my memory, I can't remember seeing any windows in the UFO since the light was too bright to make out details. But in my drawings, there were large round windows all around the UFO, some with faces looking out. Story 2. Was most likely probed. Aliens may have taken my math smarts with them. When I was in 6th grade, I woke up one day with 4 very small holes on my upper right thigh. It looked like the skin had been cut out in perfect tiny circles, yet there was no blood. The circles were in a straight line and across my thigh horizontally, no more than 6 inches wide completely. I also felt very tired and couldn't remember what I had dreamt, which is weird for me since I pretty much remember every dream I have every night. I put band-aids on them and went to school as usual. The next morning, I wake up and there were 3 new holes right above the previous 4. I woke up again very tired and drowsy and was now weirded out by how symmetrical everything was that I showed my mom, who said it was most likely ant or spider bites. The next morning, 2 more holes above the previous 3, and the morning after that, just 1 hole. This is when I was seriously scared since the holes now formed a triangle that pointed to my knee, and they weren't even scabbing over. I was so tired and confused and was scared to go to bed, so I stayed up really late but woke up the next morning not even knowing when I had fallen asleep, only dark and then morning. When I did wake up, I was suddenly very alert, and when I threw my blanket off my legs, I found all the holes just completely gone. No scabbing or scarring or any trace of the circles on my thigh. I showed my mom and she just brushed it off as if it had healed like any other cut. I'm honestly not sure if this is related, but I do feel like there is a correlation. After this, I couldn't really comprehend math anymore. I had excelled at math all my life, but after this incident, it was like numbers had no meaning to me and I couldn't figure out simple equations. I went to an advanced school and had been learning algebra and geometry and was doing great, but then it was like, poof, all my math knowledge and comprehension, gone. To this day, I can't even do simple addition problems without double checking them. Story 3. Was camping in a campground in North Georgia with some friends. It was starting to rain down, so everyone left their tents in the woods and decided to rent one of the on site cabins for everyone to sleep in. I decided I'd just sleep in my car because they wanted to stay up late and I was tired from kayaking all day. I woke up to the rain stopping and it was kind of cold in the car and I had forgotten my sleeping bag in my tent. I checked the cabin to see if there was any room left and the light was on and everyone was fast asleep around 3 a.m. I didn't want to squeeze in, so I decided to trek my way to my tent in the dark with a small pen light. In order to get to my tent, I had to pass by everyone they left. Mine was the last one, and even then was at least 50 feet from the previous tent before it. So I get in my tent, covered up with my sleeping bag, and prepared to catch the last few hours of sleep before the sun rose. No more than 10 or 15 minutes from me getting in my tent, I began to hear light whispers right outside the tent door. They weren't in English and to my recollection indecipherable, not any language I had heard at all. Just as the voices started, two orbs appeared together outside the tent. They weren't the same glare as a flashlight would make, and both were of two different colors that, to the best of my ability, had no real distinct color, just colorful. The whispers outside the tent began arguing louder between each other, but still in a hushed tone. And as the whispers grew louder, the lights began swirling around the tent, behind me, to the side, to the front, not in the movement that one could make with flashlights. And at this point, I realized no footsteps could be heard. I uncovered myself and I knelt on the tent floor, preparing for the zipper to come undone like in a horror movie. And I was flipping through my mind on what option to take. I was the most terrified I'd ever been, fight or flight. The lights swirled faster and the voices grew louder, but still breathy and whispery. My mind raced and I was sweating despite the cold, and then, just like that, the lights shut off like a switch and the whispers stopped in nothing but the silence of an empty wood. I stood there as still as I could and I didn't dare go outside that tent till the sun came up. It was and still is the scariest moment of my life. I hope this makes sense. I've never written it out before. If I need to answer anything, I can try in between moments at work. Interestingly enough, I went to a horror movie premiere recently and there was a scene that had voices in it and goosebumps ran up my arm. It was identical. Story 4. Oh boy, here we go. This is going to be long, very hard to explain, to clarify. I didn't think I was abducted, but my friend did. So I was about 15. Every night, a guy I'll call Jay and I would sneak out at about midnight and go back home around 4 or 5 in the morning before our parents would wake up for work. On one particular night, we had just snuck out and it was about 1 a.m. We headed to my backyard, lay on the trampoline, stared at the stars, and talked like we always did. Now, if you're in a room right now and you look around, you'll see the definite four corners where your ceiling and walls meet. You can see how square they are. They turn, edge of the wall, sharp turn, a second wall, same with your ceiling. You can see each individual flat surface. The sky did that night. It went from staring at the stars to looking like a cube in the sky. From the southeast corner of the sky came this giant UFO, and I mean like huge, as if it took up a quarter of the entire sky. We both stared at it in dead silence. It didn't make any noise even as it moved, and while it spun, it was only hovering straight. The spinning didn't move like you would imagine a frisbee doing. The sides just turned while it moved. I guess what it looked like doesn't really matter, but Jay and I had our eyes dead set on it. We didn't say a word. We didn't point it out to show the other person. As it began coming toward us, we both flipped over. Again, no hints, no talking, no eye contact. In total sync, we flipped onto our stomachs and stayed as flat and quiet as we could. Now, ducking from something sounds totally normal and instinctive, but that's not what this was. It was literally almost like telepathy. I can remember us having a mental conversation of stay flat and it won't see us. Don't move. We watch it make a weird angled C shape across the sky. And although it felt totally in slow motion, it could have only been a few minutes because I think both of us held our breath the entire time. Now for the weirdest part, as soon as it was out of sight, boom, daybreak. We had literally just gotten to the yard and I know it was 1:15 a.m. because I checked. But the minute we felt released from laying flat, it was very bright, like 7:30 to 8 a.m. bright. I don't remember talking to him at all afterward other than making eye contact and then making a break for our homes before our parents noticed we weren't there. In a few weeks, maybe months, I'm talking to my brother's girlfriend about what happened. Apparently, she's really into that kind of stuff, but also completely terrified. She said the fact that it felt like a few minutes, but then it was suddenly 6 or 7 hours later truly 100% makes her think we were abducted. She was serious. I made a joke about how I should go to hypnotherapy to unblock the memories, and she deadpans and says, don't. People who were abducted are traumatized by what happened to them. They even get PTSD. The next day, she texted me about how she couldn't sleep. I think abduction is a little bit of a stretch, and she watched way too many Discovery Channel documentaries, but the weird loss of time still irks me. I do know what we saw was 100% real. Aliens? I don't know. Abductions? I don't know. Story 5. I had a year-long experience of strange events that I've never been able to explain or have a full memory of. It started in winter working up north on a project. Our crew was put up in a motel 10 minutes outside of the largest town in the area. I somehow got upgraded to a king-size bed with couches, a nice room. Our days were long, so I used the couches to stack my clothes in piles, jeans, hoodies, etc. I had brought my entire desktop computer with me, was in the middle of a massive argument with my ex over Facebook Messenger at 1 a.m. during the second week up there. At some point, I opened my eyes and I was sitting on top of a pile of hoodies on the couch. The time was now 4 a.m. I rushed over to the computer. At some point, after 1 a.m., I had stopped typing a sentence midway through. My ex had left a ton of messages throughout the night demanding I answer her back. She also left missed calls and texts on my phone, which was still sitting beside the mouse. I figured I had somehow passed out, but wasn't sure how I ended up on top of my hoodies on the couch and not just falling into bed. Went to sleep normally for a remaining couple of hours before work. A couple of days later, a stranger scenario happened. My routine was we'd finish work, I'd come back to the motel around 9 p.m., shower, change, and drive into town for late-night dinner at Boston Pizza, the only restaurant open late other than McDonald's. So this particular night, I went through my routine, took a shower, changed, and headed for the door. I got to my car, and when I turned it on, something felt really wrong. I looked at the time, and it was now 2 a.m. I had no idea how I had lost around 4 hours between showering and getting into my car. It felt weird. My whole body felt weird. I felt violated, like a victim would describe waking up from being assaulted while passed out. You feel violated, but you have no idea what happened. Not a single memory or explanation. And I stayed up all night scared so much trying to figure out what happened. Why was I missing 4 hours? And if I had passed out, why didn't I wake up on the floor? Why did I feel violated, etc.? For the rest of the project, nothing else happened. But once I got back home, things started happening that were just as weird. There's more to my experiences if people want to know. It only lasted for about a year, but those two events were the starting catalysts. I've never actually figured out what happened, but most people I've asked all seem to agree it had to be abduction events. These events happened from 2011 to 2012, and my job at the time also included 4 trips of 3 weeks duration to both that town and another town 40 minutes away from the initial town where the first 2 missing times occurred. In my research, I found out that the first town where this happened was and is a hotspot for UFO activity. As to the carbon monoxide question, my landlord required it and still does. It gets inspected twice a year along with the smoke detectors. I don't know, however, if any of the motels and hotels I stayed at had carbon monoxide detectors. Pretty much a few weeks after I started avoiding sleep, when I felt the events coming and would make a point of staying in highly populated areas at night, these events stopped and have not returned since. The residual left behind of me not wanting to sleep at night, sometimes I chalk up to fear that comes up from this event. Same with closing the blinds in all rooms at night. If I want to go to sleep, I have had no problem doing so since the event, and I haven't experienced any similar dreams since either. For the first month or so, nothing happened further, but then something weird started happening. I began waking up at around 2 a.m. and not being able to fall back asleep until the sun came up. I would wake up and have the urge to turn on every light in the apartment and stay up, find things to do, and wait until sunup before going back to bed. I started to notice that in my dreams, random strangers would show up telling me to wake up. If I tried to ignore them in my dream, they would always find ways to harass me and tell me to wake up, telling me it's really important that I wake up. Then there was a really vivid dream. I'd gotten dressed up in my dream and driven to an upscale hotel. No idea what the context of this dream was. When I got to my hotel room in the dream, someone started knocking on the door, shouting, "Hello? Hello?" over and over again. Just when I was about to open the door, the phone would ring. I answered and the voice on the phone told me not to open the door. I kept telling whoever was on the phone that I should really see why this person keeps knocking, but the voice kept urging me not to answer the door. I finally hung up the phone, headed to the door, opened it, woke up in bed in a cold sweat. 3 a.m. Couldn't go back to sleep. These were the kinds of dreams, people trying to get me to wake up and random flashes of bright white light that would light up everything no matter where I was or what time of day in my dream. I remember one dream of being outside in the middle of a sunny day and a bright white flash that overpowered the sun. And usually at this point, some random person in my dream would run up to me and urge me to wake up, or tell me the flash wasn't part of my dream and I should wake up. Random people in your dream telling you you're in a dream and that you have to wake up is creepy as hell. And they were always strangers, no one I ever knew in real life. A precursor to these dreams was the urge to go to sleep early. I would have these urges to drop everything that I was doing and get in bed, sometimes leaving lights on, TV on, in the middle of games, middle of eating, etc. There was no fighting it. I would put down the controller or put my fork down and march right to my room and lie down. It was this weird zombie-like drowsiness, but I would always wake up after 2 a.m. and then not be able to go to sleep again until the sun came up. During the summer, I took a trip to upstate New York with a friend and we stayed at a motel overnight before heading further on our trip. That night, I remember knocking on my door and someone who kept yelling, "Hello, hello," just like in that hotel dream before. I remember my friend was fast asleep, unfazed by the knock, but I ended up going to the door and unlocking it. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up sitting on the office chair by the desk around 6 a.m. I checked, but the door was locked and nothing had been taken. It didn't look like anyone had entered. I woke my friend up and asked if he'd heard knocking during the night. He said no. I told him what happened and he was pretty pissed that I would wake up in the middle of the night to open the door to a stranger. But there was no sign that I did that or that someone had come in, just that I somehow ended up on the chair, not on the bed. I still feel like I was awake when I went to answer the door though. The really weird thing was these dreams and urges to go to sleep wouldn't always happen, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. But I was starting to fear going to sleep without the lights on and all blinds closed, or I'd fight to stay up all night and just go to sleep during the day. After this, I was getting really fed up with how messed up my sleeping schedule had become, and I started to notice when I'd get the feeling that I should go to sleep, I would take that as a cue to get in my car and head for the busiest section of the city at night I could find, filled with people, and I'd notice that the urge to go to sleep would go away instantly. So every time I felt the urge to drop everything and go to sleep, I would fight the urge and drive downtown. Anytime I felt like I was being watched, too, I'd get in my car and go downtown. It must have worked because after a few weeks of doing this, all these strange urges to go to sleep randomly, dreams with flashes of white light and people telling me to wake up, they just all went away. I haven't had a single recurrence of these events since. However, I noticed I still have a fear of going to sleep until the sun comes up that I'm always fighting. I always recently noticed, too, that pictures of the typical gray alien now scare the crap out of me and I hate looking at them. Even seeing the cartoon ones on South Park, I get mini panic attacks. Those pictures had never bothered me before in my life, but now they send me into waves of panic. I still have no explanation for the missing time up north, the weird dreams, or that one night at the motel in upstate New York, which I don't think was a dream. It felt very real and felt more like another missing time event. Most people I've told don't know what to make of it. My current girlfriend has noticed I obsess with making sure all blinds are closed with no open slivers no matter where I sleep. I told this story to someone at a party once and the guy came out and told me his abduction story. He was pretty positive I had been getting abducted during that year and that they'd either gotten bored of me or I had become a hassle with constantly trying to drive to places full of people to avoid the happenings. Other friends either offer no explanation or believe some sort of abduction scenario was taking place. Who knows? I have no memory of physically being abducted, but those weird feelings of being watched and being urged to go to sleep and feeling violated when waking up, that stuff felt real and still bothers me. Story 6. About 20 years ago, I was walking home from the shops with my dad and we stopped to watch some really odd lights in the sky. There were 2 lights, slightly bigger than the stars zooming around and orbiting each other, making figure eights, etc. And when they stopped moving, got bigger and bigger until bright light filled the sky and then they were gone, we carried on our journey home. We hadn't stopped for more than 5 minutes. The whole journey should have been 20 minutes. When we got home, my mom was freaking out. We'd been gone for 65 minutes and our watches were both still working, but were 45 minutes behind every clock in the house. She had neighbors and friends looking for us. I don't know what happened to me and my dad or what we saw. Maybe nothing? Story 7. I live in a pretty secluded part of Washington state. I was in my late teens and my parents had gone to Seattle for something, so I was put in charge of the property. I was closing everything up, i.e. the barn we own and some other small utility buildings, when I looked up and saw 3 reddish-orange lights in a triangular formation. They were just floating there as if they were magnified stars, so magnified, in fact, that everything was slightly illuminated by their warm hue. I'm mesmerized, standing there, and suddenly lose my sense of balance as if the ground in front of me has begun rising and I pass out. Next thing I know, I'm on the ground in the barn I had locked up, according to my watch, half an hour before. Needless to say, I was petrified. I scurried to the house with my tail between my legs, scared and confused. I slept not at all that night, and any sense of security I had was gone. Even though I was locked safely in my house, I felt hopelessly exposed. In hindsight, I think it's possible I was lightheaded, opened the barn door, and fell down, but it still shakes me up thinking about it. Story 8. Not entirely sure if we were abducted, but my wife, who was a non believer, and I both have missing time. We were having sex on our bed when we suddenly both came to and were in totally different places in the room. Not sure how much time had passed, but she looked at me and said, "What the hell just happened?" And I said I wasn't sure. Neither of us were scared, and we were both incredibly tired. We decided we would just go to bed and talk about it in the morning. I looked up instances of missing time, and a lot of them said the same thing. When they came to, they were just very tired, knew something was totally weird, but just wanted to go to sleep.